Good evening and welcome to the first Illinois Congressional District 13 Democratic Primary Candidate Forum of the season. I'm Diane Orr, one of the core leaders of Bend the Arc Jewish Action Champaign-Urbana, your host this evening. Bend the Arc is a movement of American Jews and allies all across the country fighting for justice and equality. We work on issues like immigration and racial justice, and we help elect officials who share our vision of the world. We knocked on almost 5,000 doors in 2018 to get Democrats elected up and down the ballot, and we helped defeat Trump in 2020 during a pandemic. If you want to join us in our work, please find us online or on Facebook. Our co-hosts this evening are the Ubuntu project of Champaign-Urbana and Indivisible, Illinois, who assisted by writing some of the questions for tonight's forum. Ubuntu's mission is to raise the critical consciousness to liberate Black people through education and direct action. Indivisible, Illinois works to resist oppression and protect fundamental rights. They insist that our elected officials fulfill their responsibility to represent us. Tonight, we have the opportunity to hear from the three candidates who are running as Democrats for Illinois District 13, Nikki Budzinski, David Palmer, and Ellis Taylor. Hello and welcome. Now I'll turn the virtual microphone over to social justice advocate and awesome moderator, Elizabeth Hess. Elizabeth loves to interview politicians before and after they're elected. Elizabeth.
There we go. Hi. Thank you very much, Diane, and good evening. The host of tonight's congressional panel, of course, Bend the Arc, Jewish Action CU. This wouldn't be possible without all of you. Thank you as well to the co-host, Indivisible, Illinois, as well as the Ubuntu project, Champaign-Urbana. Tonight is also possible because of immigration and environmental allies. I want to welcome tonight's candidates. Of course, we would not also be here without Nikki Budzinski, David Palmer, and Ellis Taylor. We are going to introduce you alphabetically, and then throughout the night, we will mix up the order of the questions for fairness. You will have 2 minutes each to introduce yourselves, and each question, you will have 2 minutes to answer that as well. I will start a timer on my phone for 2 minutes. When there are 15 seconds left, I'll hold it up and that'll let you know that it's time to start wrapping up your answer. Now, we won't be taking questions from the audience tonight, but what they can do is put it in the chat. It will come to the panelists, it will come to Jen Roth, and we will take those questions and we will forward them to your campaign. So in the future, you can answer them. We ask that you refrain from any negative comments about the other candidates, that you also don't talk about your endorsements. We are here to learn about you and how you feel on the issues. So we appreciate that. And I know this panel will be professional and cordial. First, welcome to Nikki Budzinski. Born in Peoria, Nikki's parents taught her the importance of family, community, and service to others. Nikki attended the University of Illinois. She was inspired to devote her life to public service after interning with former Congressman Dick Gebhardt, former Senator Paul Simon, and Planned Parenthood. As Governor J.B. Pritzker's senior advisor on labor issues, Nikki successfully led the charge to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Nikki served as the chair of the Broadband Advisory Council that expanded high-speed broadband internet across Illinois. Thank you for being here tonight, Nikki.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And thank you to Diane and Bend the Arc and all of the partners with Bend the Arc for hosting this forum tonight. It's a great opportunity for all of us to introduce ourselves and for me to tell you a little bit about my campaign. I am the granddaughter of a union painter and union public school teachers. Both were members of the Illinois Education Association. They taught me the importance of hard work. They also taught me the importance of what the labor movement means for working people. My parents were both also community activists. My mom is a former, in Peoria, the president of the League of Women Voters. And it was these values that were really instilled in me in a very young age that made me commit myself in my career to supporting working people. And that's truly what my campaign is all about. It's about lowering the cost of prescription drugs. It's about creating more good paying union jobs. And it's about making sure that we are fighting for working people in every corner of central and southern Illinois. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm very proud to have worked in the labor movement. When I worked for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, I was fighting on behalf of low-wage workers to get a good pay, have safe working conditions. I'm probably one of the very few congressional candidates you'll meet that can tell you I've been on a kill floor. I've seen what the importance and the value is of the labor movement. And that's what I really had committed myself to when I worked for the UFCW. When I worked for the Firefighters Union, it was about making sure that firefighters got the training, the equipment that they needed to do a very dangerous job as safely as possible. As Elizabeth mentioned, I have been in public service, and I was incredibly honored to help lead the charge to pass a $15 minimum wage in the state of Illinois, the first time working people in Illinois had an increase in 9 years. And as Elizabeth mentioned, I also had the opportunity to chair the Broadband Advisory Council. These are things that actually delivered real results for working people throughout central and southern Illinois while I was in public service. I have lived in Springfield in and out of throughout my career. I have been in Springfield, and as Elizabeth mentioned, I'm a proud graduate of the University of Illinois. So I was incredibly honored to come back home to take on this challenge. We are running a strong campaign to get the vote out, to make sure that we have the boots on the ground. Union members are fueling this campaign. We're raising the resources that we need to get our message out. And I am incredibly proud of the support that we've built throughout the 13th district. When I was working for President Biden in the Office of Management and Budget, and Rodney Davis voted against the American Rescue Plan, I knew I needed to come home and be a champion for working families throughout central and southern Illinois. That's why I've decided to run. That's what I've committed my career to. And that's what I'll do when I'm elected to Congress. I'm here tonight to ask for your support. I'd be honored to have it. And I look forward to the discussion throughout this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. And for fairness sake, we will give David as well 2.5 minutes and Ellis 2.5 minutes. So yes, I appreciate your introduction. Next, we have David Palmer. And as I mentioned, it's alphabetically. David was raised outside of Nashville. He's a retirement planning advisor with Bloomington-based Country Financial. After retiring from his professional basketball career, David spent time with his wife, Chelsea, and her family in Champaign. Chelsea started her career at Central Illinois Produce. While David's work with Country Financial has given him the opportunity of helping everyday people improve their financial situations, it has also given him insight into the issues facing local farmers and small business owners. David and his wife, Chelsea, have 2 children, David Jr. and a daughter, Quincy Rose. David, we appreciate you being here tonight. Can you please tell us about your campaign and what got you into this race?
Thank you. So like you mentioned, I went to the University of Iowa. As I was growing up, it was really important to me to be a really big part of my community. I watched my father be very integral in just being out, being in the community and showing what that real personal touch can do, right? And so for me, I was able to play basketball for a while. I was able to play at the University of Iowa, so I hope no one here holds that against me. But that's where I went to school at, and I was proud to be a Hawkeye. But one of the most proud things that I am is that I was able to work at the Boys and Girls Club here in Champaign, Illinois, for some time, and it was one of the most amazing experiences that I was able to have, being able to be a part of the community, be inside of it, to really, get to work with kids on a day-to-day basis, get to interact with their parents, just get to find out what makes them tick, how we can help and just be a part of their life. And so, as we were doing that, my wife and I, we also had some life changes like a lot of people. We decided to get married, we decided to buy a house. We found out that she was pregnant. And so my life kind of took me away from youth development, and it was kind of a really sad thing because I only left because youth development doesn't pay a ton of money, right? It just doesn't provide a lot of kind of financial assistance to people who work there. And so, with a budding small family, I had to make sure that, we were going to be taken care of. And so I took a job in more of a kind of a, traditional job, I guess. And, I got to work with people and plan retirement and it was amazing, but I still had that kind of, itch to get back in the community, to really be a part of what's going on here and to really have more boots on the ground. And so I I went out and I started helping people here locally get elected to different offices. I worked with different city council members and helped, people get elected. And it was amazing. And during this journey, I really figured out that I wanted to be a part of this process and I wanted to make a difference myself. And so that, led me to, really talking to a group of people here that I really respect and getting in this race. And we are proud of the campaign that we have here. And we feel good about what we're doing. And we're excited today just to share a little bit about, what we think and how we can help this community.
Well, we appreciate you being here tonight. And we also look forward to hearing how you feel about the issues. Nikki and David, we also welcome Ellis Taylor to the panel. Ellis grew up in the Peoria area, Washington specifically. He's lived in Bloomington, Normal, El Paso, Champaign, as well as Homer. He's a full-time student in community college in Decatur. Ellis recently worked at a gas station for 2 years at almost minimum wage, and it adversely affected his health during a pandemic. Since he left, he has been engaged in the ongoing fight on behalf of essential workers. Ellis credits his mother, a cancer survivor, for his work ethic. She's the most important and influential person in his life. Ellis, thank you so much for joining us today. Would love to hear about why you've chosen this candidacy.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I'd like to, as both the other candidates stated, I want to thank you guys for putting this on. I'm so excited to be able to. This is kind of one of my first big public facing things. I know a lot of people have been telling me that they just didn't even know who I was before this. So I'm very excited to be here and have an opportunity to talk about my campaign and talk about the things that matter to me. I am a gay trans man. I am a poor person. I have lived in poverty for basically my entire adult life. And what I saw consistently is politicians who had money, who had resources, who, couldn't tell you the price of bread off the top of their head, some of them, who didn't really understand what I needed, who claimed to speak for the communities that I'm a part of or that the people I care about are a part of, but hadn't ever lived in our shoes. People making legislation about trans people who never had to go through second puberty, who never had to deal with someone looking at you and trying to figure out whether you're a boy or a girl and then getting it wrong and embarrassing you. And I think that although everyone should have a seat at the table, the voices that haven't been heard, the marginalized voices, need to be at the forefront of these conversations if we ever want to see real significant change. And I think that having more people who are like me, who have lived in poverty, who have struggled, who have lived paycheck to paycheck and, worked as an essential worker during a pandemic and saw the people posting on Facebook that I was a hero, but who didn't care enough to wear a mask when they came into the gas station, who came in just to buy snacks. And it's like, you're risking my health so you can buy a bag of chips on your way to work. And I decided that I needed to run for office, that I needed to find a way to make this thing work, even without the financial resources or, the sort of structural resources, that I needed to be the person who could make those voices heard and make my voice heard. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm running for office.
Okay, thank you so much. It is great to have all of you here. I'm going to reset the timer so that we each have 2 minutes to answer each of the questions. And as I mentioned, I will mix up the order. The first 2 questions tonight come from the co-host, Illinois Indivisible. We are kicking off tonight's forum with a question about democracy and voting rights. First of all, I'm going to start with you, David. Republicans plan on weaponizing parents concerned over school curriculum. They are purposefully stoking fears over how or whether to teach this country's history. As we all know, parents will do anything to protect their kids. It doesn't matter whether they are Democrats or Republicans. They will not vote for the person they think will harm their kids. How do you intend to meet this challenge as you campaign? And as I mentioned, David, we'll start with you.
So I think the one thing about it in this question is that obviously my platform here is really kind of cemented in advocating for children and making sure that they have a better future here. And so for me, this question is interesting because of course I'm going to make sure that I fight for that kind of curriculum protection and the educational system as a whole. But I think more so to me as well that what I take from this question is that what Republicans have really done is just kind of change the education conversation, right? They've made it about critical race theory and all these things. But I think here, politics is a local thing. When I'm talking to teachers and school board members here, they're talking about, hey man, we have razor thin budgets. Like we're asked to do so much more work and we're not getting paid anything extra. Like these are the things that they're continually talking about. And so locally, we don't have, I guess, a lot of that kind of angst and arguing and resentment over the critical race theory. But we do need to make sure that we're taking a look at education and we're finding out what matters. And we have to make sure that we're supporting our teachers, that we're putting them in better situations, because this affects our children. And I think the one thing that we learned during the COVID-19 pandemic is that without a funded and functioning educational system, that our whole society has to adapt, and it's usually a rough thing for everyone to do. And so we've got to get this educational system back running smooth, and we've got to make sure that we get the teachers the kind of support that they're begging for. And so, I understand the question, totally agree that it's been a problem. But I think that we have to make sure that we're talking about the real issues here.
Great. Thank you so much, David. And if subsequent panelists need me to re-ask the question, I can use an abbreviated version, and I'm happy to re-ask the question. Ellis, I ask you the same question. How do you intend to meet this challenge as you campaign?
Well, I think my first thought upon hearing that question is that the CRT concerns, or more recently, the concerns about socio-emotional learning, I just don't think they're real, right? Like it's not an idea that's based in any kind of reality. If you've done any amount of research on what CRT actually is, that's not being taught in our schools. It is a concern that has been blown entirely out of proportion by right-wing grifters, basically, by the Fox News types. And to be completely honest, I'm not much interested in catering my message to people who watch Fox News, because I don't think they're going to vote for a trans man anyway. They are not my base. They are not the people I'm interested in reaching, because I just don't think I can. If you are so far removed from reality that you believe that critical race theory is being taught to grade schoolers, then you weren't going to be interested in voting for me anyway. And I think that leaving space to make those arguments is really just allowing them to move the Overton window right, and they don't get to do that anymore, or they shouldn't. We are not a right-wing party. We are a left-wing party, and we don't need to meet them where they are.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. Nikki, I asked you the same question. Would you like me to repeat it, or are you set for your answer?
I'm good. Yes. Thank you for the question, Elizabeth. I'm the granddaughter and niece of public school teachers, as I mentioned in the beginning of my introduction, both members of the Illinois Education Association. I know the commitment teachers dedicate to every day in the classroom, working to ensure that students grow and learn and reach their full potential. My favorite teacher was Mr. Cerisi in the 6th grade, who taught me a reading class where we read John Steinbeck and Charles Dickens. He opened up a new world to me. And what my family of educators and Mr. Cerisi didn't need were politicians telling them what they can and cannot teach. The reality is that parents and teachers should help our students learn, not politicians. The last thing we need are politicians in Washington coming in and telling us how to best teach our children. Over the last 2 years, parents and teachers have been navigating unparalleled challenges, making sure that children are learning while we fought the pandemic. We need to focus our attention on the COVID learning loss that students have been through over these last 2 years and support these students in catching up on reading, writing, and arithmetic. My focus will be on supporting teachers, parents, and school districts to ensure children have the resources they need to excel. And I will defer to those professionals to set the curriculum, not a political party, and quite honestly, not me, a candidate for Congress.
Thank you very much, Nikki. The second question, as I mentioned, also from Illinois Indivisible. Illinois 13 is a highly rural community, making farmers an important voting bloc. Ever since Trump imposed tariffs on China, farmers have seen their incomes decline. Now, thanks to the pandemic, they're seeing historically high costs for fertilizer and farm equipment. This voting sector is overwhelmingly Republican. How do you plan to go about convincing farmers they should vote for the party they not only blame for their woes, but also does not care about them? I'm going to start this time with Ellis.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to say in response to that is that this is not an overwhelmingly rural district. This is an overwhelmingly a district made up of cities. It's been gerrymandered specifically to make sure that it was mostly urban centers, as urban centers are mostly voting blue. So yes and no. However, it is a real genuine issue for farmers that there are a lot of things that have been happening in recent times between the pandemic and, tariffs and all of that, that has made it difficult for smaller farmers to succeed. And I think one of the biggest problems with that is how many of them are getting bought out by big conglomerates, by big agribusiness. And I think that is the real issue that we need to be talking about, but it's also not new. It's something that both parties have allowed to happen for years before now and have only been exacerbated by current conditions. So I think what the conversation really needs to be is we need to break up the monopolies. We need to enforce and even put in place new antitrust legislation to ensure that these businesses cannot take over the entire market. We need to increase taxes, but make sure that it is progressive and based on profit so that the people who are getting taxed heavily are not the small businesses, but are the big corporations that are running the small guys out of town. And we also need to stop subsidizing the big businesses and start subsidizing based on need, based on who actually needs the assistance. And also, I think, honestly, we should seize the land from some of these agribusinesses and consider giving it to Black and Indigenous people of color in the form of reparations.
Thank you very much, Ellis. The second panelist that I asked to answer this question is Nikki this time. Nikki? Oh, we need to unmute Nikki. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. As a part of my campaign, I was just saying I've had the opportunity to actually meet with the Illinois Farm Bureau along with the Champaign and Macoupin County Farm Bureaus. I think it's critically important to understand the issues most important to the farming communities throughout the 13th district, recognizing that very often the member of Congress from this district serves on the House Agriculture Committee. I've heard firsthand from farmers their concerns about rising fuel and fertilizer costs, along with serious concerns around facing the supply chain. And we need to be doing everything we can to support these working families, whether they're on or off the farm in central and southern Illinois. I also believe we need to stand up to China. Making more things here right in America, stopping China from stealing our jobs, I think is also critically important. We need to find short-term relief for farmers and working people struggling to make ends meet as the costs of fuel, bread, and milk are increasing. I applaud the governor for proposing the suspension of the 1% sales tax increase for the year as families deal with rising costs, but I also applaud his efforts to provide some immediate property tax relief. I support taking a serious look as well at suspending the gas tax increase that would go into effect for this year. I know when I last pumped my gas, it was about $60 to fill up my tank, which is a tremendous burden for working families. When I go to Congress, I will always fight for the middle class, for middle class tax relief and tax cuts, as opposed to the Republican Party, which passed the Trump tax cuts for the super wealthy. Trump's tax plans allocated 83% of the tax breaks to the super wealthy while adding $2 trillion to our national debt. The super rich do not need relief. The middle class deserve tax cuts. But I also want to say that in the long term, China is the biggest geopolitical threat to our country. And it's no surprise that they would not meet their obligations to buy American goods in the previous round of trade negotiations. When I served in the Biden administration at the Office of Management and Budget, I helped to establish the Made in America office, which I was incredibly proud to assist with. We need to make more things right here in America. We need to make them right here in Illinois. Our supply chain issues that farmers confront have been building for decades. Until we prioritize making things in America again and stop China, from stealing our jobs, we're going to be continuing to confront these supply chain issues. And so in Congress, I will be a strong vote to support our agriculture economy and the farmers that quite possibly or quite simply make it possible. So thank you for that question.
Well, thank you very much, Nikki. And David, I would love to hear how you plan to get this voting bloc to vote on the Democrats.
Yeah, so, I mentioned earlier how, I work at the Boys and Girls Club and I had to lead youth development to go work somewhere where I actually went to go work at Country Trust Bank, which is owned by the Illinois Farm Bureau. And so kind of my day-to-day there was, talking to different groups of people on the phone and helping them kind of get ready for retirement. And so one of the blocks I had was obviously farmers. And so I just remember the continual conversations that I would have. And I'm like, hey, what are the most important things to you as we start to get ready for retirement? Always heard, these two answers somewhere along the way every single time. I want to make sure that my Social Security, stays intact. That's really important, right? And I want to make sure that the cost of healthcare isn't going to go crazy as I'm now on more of a fixed income. And so we know what, political party is going to be advocating for those things. And so I think what the Republicans have done is that they've done a really good job at dividing kind of that rural population and the urban population, because our needs for the most part are kind of the same, right? Because if you look at what's going on, in urban communities and in rural communities, there are food deserts in rural communities and urban communities that need to be addressed, right? There are a lack of teachers in rural communities and urban communities, and that needs to be addressed. And so, these are issues that we share. And so the Republicans know that if you divide people, you can take them away from their common interests. And what they've done is made a really consistent voting block out of it. Now, I also think that Democrats have to be innovative. We have to have strategies that work. We need to implement programs where, people want to be involved in them. There's a really cool program that I know about. It's called Fresh Hubs, where, they take local, smaller type farmers and they connect them with people in inner cities who have a hard time finding fresh fruits and vegetables. Programs like this are what we have to advocate for, give them more funding, which also gives them more reach. And I think we can bring these communities together. And once we do that, we can really start to see change to go forth in this country. And so, I think that I can really address that issue and make sure that gets done.
Thank you all very much for that answer. The next two questions cover white supremacy and white nationalism, and they come from host Ben the Arc, Jewish Action CU. The first person I will ask this question, Nikki, you are up first on this one. The American Defamation League Center on Extremism tracked a near doubling of white supremacist propaganda efforts in 2020, which included the distribution of racist, anti-Semitic, and anti-LGBTQ flyers, stickers, banners, and posters. Anti-Semitic flyers have recently been distributed in Champaign-Urbana. What new action should be taken by Congress to improve safety for Jews and other marginalized communities in Illinois and the United States?
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth, for this important question. There should be no place for white supremacists in our police departments, our fire departments, or in our classrooms. We must be extremely cognizant of everyone's First Amendment rights. But if it comes to a person that veers into calling for violence or violates the code of conduct, we must take that seriously. And that means we need to be standing up to white supremacists. We need to be standing up to anti-Semitism. There is no place in this country for these types of issues. And I will say that this is no longer just a Jewish issue or an LGBTQ issue. This is an American issue that we need to really be confronting head on. And so I thank you for that question, because it's something that in Congress I will stand up to. And it's something that I think is incredibly important that we be standing up against and fighting against the polarization in our country, and making sure that we are standing up against anti-Semitism. It's incredibly important.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Next, David, I would like to ask you the same question.
All right, there we go. So I think obviously, right, it's terrible. It should not be happening. But I think I want to take the question a little different way, right? One of the things to me, I think one of the constant problems and historic roadblocks to like really making sure that we protect, these historically marginalized kind of groups is that we have such an inability to actually be at the table to make legislation and represent ourselves. I think that's one of the biggest problems. And I think we have to address that. I think that, we have these super gerrymandered districts and all these different things that go into people representing people who don't understand them and who don't know what their fundamental issues are. I can look in a window and see what I think the problem is, but you've got to really get inside a community to really know what's going on and to advocate for it. And I think we have to fix that. I think there's so much of this, humongous, big donor money in politics. And I think what it does, it blurs the political lines for people. And I think we've got to fix that. And so for me, when I'm the next congressman of this district, the two things that I'm going to be fighting for to make sure that people can be protected are the Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act. I think we have to get better representation in Congress. People have to represent themselves. That's the only way that we can ensure that we have the ability to fight back against these kind of hateful kind of tactics that have been going on, is that we can, go sit at the table, advocate for ourselves, and make meaningful legislation that works for our community. So that's my kind of take on that question there.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Ellis, do you need me to re-ask the question, or are you set with your answer?
No, I think I'm all right, but thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think this is, for myself, obviously, is a really big issue. I, as a gay person, as a trans person, I'm a little bit scared for my safety sometimes. I don't necessarily feel like there's any systems in place to really protect me. And I think part of the problem with that is that the systems that are supposed to be protecting us are full of white supremacists. We have white supremacists at a remarkable number, and we know this. There are statistics that show that a remarkable number of people in the military, in the police, the people that we are giving a license to violence are members of white supremacist hate groups. We have so many white supremacist hate groups in this country. It's absurd. And we're not doing anything about it. We're not doing anything to legitimately stop the fact that there are cops with Nazi swastika tattoos. And there is not enough pressure to genuinely stop these people. I don't want anybody to say that I'm not for freedom of speech, because I am. But there's a difference between speech that needs to be protected and speech that should be censored. There's a reason we don't allow people to walk around throwing slurs around. You're not allowed to just walk up to someone and call them a terrible name. There is speech that is hate speech that is not okay. There is speech that is calling for violence that is not okay. And I'm sorry, But if you are a white supremacist, if you are a neo-Nazi, if you are, in any way associating yourself with groups like the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys or the 3%ers, that is innately violent. That is an idea that cannot lead to anything but violence. There is not a path that doesn't lead to you trying to kill me and people like me. So it just cannot be tolerated.
Thank you very much, Ellis. David, you are up first on this next question. And Ellis led us right here. According to the ADL, violent extremism is on the rise and white supremacists are infiltrating police departments. Anti-government advocates are marketing conspiracy theories and training sessions aimed at law enforcement. What do you propose Congress does to prevent white supremacists from being not only hired by law enforcement agencies, to what should they do to fire white supremacists already working in law enforcement? How should they prevent the training of law enforcement using white supremacist propaganda? David, you're up.
Yeah. Okay, I'm on. So I think obviously, with the white supremacists in our police force, we've got to sniff them out and find that. We obviously know that that's going to just really perpetuate, kind of race relation problems and just be a general black eye on our community and our policing here. And so we've got to fix that. But I think in a moment of, where we know there are kind of staffing shortages in the police officers department, and there's outcries throughout the country for really increasing more police officers, I think we may have a unique opportunity here to kind of curb that problem. I think what we have to do is look at the way we recruit police officers. I think first and foremost, we have a fundamental problem there. And especially if you look at a community like Champaign, there's a disconnect, right? So let's say if you grow up, in one of the outskirts here, and that's going to be a majority white town. You're going to grow up in a majority white environment. You're going to have, majority white encounters. And then let's say you come to Champaign and you want to be on the police force. Well, your first experience in a minority community and around minorities is going to be probably your first day on the job. And that's an interesting dynamic that we have there. And so it's not to say that it will end, white supremacy and policing and all those kind of things. I just think it gives us a problem, an opportunity to kind of fix the problem here, right? Because we have to do something different. Like, we've talked about ad nauseum now. White supremacy and policing has been a problem for years. And to root it out, we have to really go to the foundational systems of our police force. It can't be anything less than that. And so we have to look at how we recruit, how we hire. We have to look at, it needs to be different preference points on, what it takes to become a police officer. The whole system kind of needs to be re-engineered here, because what we have currently isn't working. And I think if we just think that we can make small incremental changes and that's going to fix it, I don't think that'll work.
Okay, thank you so much, David. Ellis, this is your chance to expand upon your last answer. You're up next.
There we go. Thank you. I think that first and foremost, when it comes to issues that do primarily impact people who aren't, who don't look like me, the first thing is you listen to those marginalized groups. You go to the people who are being impacted primarily by the white supremacists in the police, by police violence, and you ask them, what do you want? What do you need? What is going to make you feel safer? And also, I think we need to be listening to who they say is a hate group. If they say this group is a hate group and they are promoting violence by their mere existence, by the things that they're promoting, then you get rid of those people, right? Like that shouldn't be allowed. If you are a member, if you are a public servant, if you are working in the employ of our society, you cannot also be on a white supremacist message board. You can't also be on Are the Donald, and be saying stuff like this, or even just agreeing with stuff like this, liking a post that says something about running over Black Lives Matter protesters. That should be an immediate termination. And I also think that something that needs to come into consideration are things like civilian review boards, making sure that there is accountability for police officers who are hateful. and, also banning the teaching of these white supremacist talking points, not just outright white supremacy, but the dog whistles, the talking points that just imply white supremacy. Those things should not be allowed in the training of our police officers. And on top of that, just getting rid of police unions. Police unions don't exist to protect workers. They exist to protect the people who protect property. And they should not get the same labor rights as people who are working in legitimate working class jobs.
Thank you for your answer, Ellis. Nikki.
Yes, thanks, Elizabeth. And just building on, some of my previous answer, I do want to reiterate, just like I had mentioned, anti-Semitism, there is no room for white supremacists in police departments, as I mentioned, in fire departments and in the classroom. And I do think we need to be cognizant, as I mentioned, of First Amendment rights. But if someone is violating their oath of office in government, we need to make sure that those people are held accountable immediately. But I do want to say, I believe that the vast majority of police officers are working every day to do the right thing, to keep our communities safe, and have an incredibly challenging and dangerous job to do every day. I would also just point out that 140 U.S. Capitol police officers were injured and 5 lost their lives during the January 6th riots. And that was law enforcement standing up against insurrectionists that were trying to overturn a free and fair election. One of the reasons I'm running for Congress is that I believe we need to be investing in people and in communities again, and that includes our police departments. We need to be investing in more training and support good policing. I had the opportunity to do a ride-along in Decatur with a law enforcement officer, and what I saw during that 8.5-hour shift was an extremely professional officer that prided himself on de-escalating tense situations through conversation and not through physical force. I saw him confront very difficult situations, including we canvassed actually a neighborhood where a shooting had just taken place. And I will also say I saw a lot of poverty in the community that he was serving. I believe we need to find real results, and that means investing in communities and in people again. And when I'm elected to Congress, that's what I'll fight for every day to get done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Our 5th question is relevant to immigration and comes from Friends of Immigration Forum. The order for this one is Ellis, Nikki, then David. So Ellis, we'll start with you. There is at least a 20-year wait for Mexican siblings of U.S. citizens to receive an immigrant visa. How would you plan to increase the number of available family-based immigrant visas to reduce the substantial backlog in issuances of these visas?
Infinitely. Borders are violence. People from other countries are just people. They're just people who are moving from one location to another location. I was born in Iowa. I was not born here in Illinois. I moved to Illinois when I was 11, and no one ever treated me differently because I was an Iowan instead of an Illinoisan. And you know what? That's how we should treat everybody. People are just people, and the fact that we even have to discuss them as if they are somehow different from us just because they were born in a different physical location is absurd. Everyone's just people. They're just people who moved. And it's ridiculous that we even have to have a conversation about how many people should be allowed to move here. That the fact that there's a limit implies that there are people who do not deserve to live within our borders, within an imaginary line that we drew. And that is ridiculous. It boggles the mind.
Thank you very much, Ellis. As I mentioned for this question, Nikki, you are second.
Yes, thank you. Look, we have a broken immigration system that has left this country with 11 million people in the shadows. We need comprehensive immigration reform. I support a pathway to citizenship. I support dreamers, and I believe we have to treat people at the border humanely. But I also do believe and support border security. We need and have needed comprehensive immigration reform for too long, and it needs to happen now. The AFL-CIO and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce have agreed together on a framework for comprehensive immigration reform, and I believe Congress should be then able to act on this. And when I'm in Congress, I am going to work incredibly hard to make sure that comprehensive immigration reform becomes a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikki. David?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that I think every president since Eisenhower has tried to put their own little spin on immigration. I think that shows you kind of the political problem it's been. But I also think too, when you think about, what this country is built on, what we stand for, who we say we are, I think an immigration system that is, difficult to navigate, it's expensive, it's cumbersome, it's really hard, especially if you're from certain countries. I think we have to live up to who we say that we've been. I think that's what it's time for. And like I said, every president has put their own spin on it. And I'm not saying I have a concrete solution, but like I said, we have to live up to our values, and we have to live up to who that we've always said that we've been. And so for me, I think you look at things like the U.S. Citizenship Act. I really like that. That's kind of a piece of legislation that kind of speaks to, if I were putting some kind of guidelines on immigration, those are the ones that I would use. It makes it to where the process is a lot smoother, a lot cleaner, takes out all the kind of, optional stuff where individuals can decide a family's kind of, fortunes. I just think, and I know I keep saying it with this answer, we've always said that we're a nation of immigrants, and we can't keep, having these serious problems with immigration and keep saying that mantra. And so I think it's time for America to, be who we say we are. And I think that we have to make more visas available, because we have to let people, come to this country and prosper the same way that we do here.
Great. Thank you so much, David. The 6th and 7th questions cover racial justice and come from co-host the Ubuntu Project, Champaign-Urbana. The order for this one will be Nikki first, David second, Ellis third. Using quality of life indicators such as percentage of household income, unemployment rate, education, and home ownership rate on several recently released lists of the 20 worst cities for Black people to live in the US, Champaign-Urbana ranked 20th, Springfield 4th, and Decatur 7th. Given the depth of Black impoverishment and the extreme racial disparities, if elected, what are your priorities and how do you plan to drastically reduce racial disparities for Black people in the 13th?
It's a great question. It's a really important question, Elizabeth. Thank you. I'm running for Congress because I want to make sure we're leaving no people, no community behind in our recovery from COVID. I believe we have an opportunity to come out of this stronger than when we went into the pandemic and meet this moment. And it's truly why I decided to take on this run for Congress. I believe that all working people in Central and Southern Illinois for too long have gone without a champion in the 13th Congressional District. Black and brown communities in the 13th District need access to good job opportunities, affordable health care, support in our child care system that is fundamentally broken, access to educational opportunities. And for too long, these working people have been underserved, overlooked, and underinvested in. And I have experience getting things done, as I said in my introduction, to the policies that support all working people, including obviously all in the Black and brown community, working class people. That's what I have been championed. When I served in Governor Pritzker's administration, I was very proud to be a part of passing a $15 minimum wage. And this was the first time working people had received an increase in their wage in 9 years. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. We can do a lot better. In the Biden administration, I was in charge and helped implement the American Rescue Plan that helped make healthcare more affordable for all working people and provided direct relief to all communities that included East St. Louis and Venice and Springfield and Champaign-Urbana, all within the 13th Congressional District. These are the policies that lift up and create opportunities in all communities, and it is what I will fight to get done when I'm elected to Congress.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikki. David, you are second.
Yeah, I think economic disparities between Black and white people in Central Illinois is a systemic issue. I think that, for decades at the, local level, at the federal level, the programs, the formulas, they've been antiquated and they haven't worked, right? We have evidence of that through these communities now. And, I think as your next congressman in this district, what I would do is legislate for solutions to close this kind of, Black economic gap that we have. Like, we have to make sure that we have a Black economic foundation to build on. That is going to be paramount to really kind of making an equitable change for this community. We have to implement programs that work, non-traditional out-of-the-box programs, right? We have to, programs like the SWIFT program at Parkland College, where, if someone wants to apply for a job training program where they can get a living stipend as well, right? Because you can't expect people to, if you're already in an adverse situation, to give up everything just to go back and try to get an education that's going to put you further in debt, and you really see no way out of it. And so we have to create meaningful and new outcomes for especially these Black and brown families, because we haven't seen that. And so, it's going to take new legislation. We're going to have to, like I said, new programs that are innovative, that kind of give people a level ground to stand on. We can't forget things like redlining of the past, where we were literally legislated out of the one thing that really grows familial wealth, which is home ownership. And so, really advocating for, mortgage guarantee programs and down payment assistance programs. That's how you really elevate, these kind of communities into a different situation.
Thank you very much, David. Ellis, I ask you the same question.
So I think the first thing, something that would be on the agenda very early on, if I am elected to Congress, is to immediately establish a committee on reparations, to immediately start putting forward whatever legislative pressure needs to make reparations happen. This country was built on the bodies, on the blood and the sweat and the tears of slaves who were brought here against their will. And we have never done anything to even attempt to make up for that. We have people who were brought here with no basic rights whatsoever, who were not given any ability to build any kind of wealth. And now we expect them to be able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I think Martin Luther King Jr. had a great quote, I wish I could remember it off the top of my head and I don't, about being able to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps when you have no boots. So we need to give these communities some freaking boots, bare minimum. And on top of that, I think we need to change education funding being based on property tax. There's no way for people to get ahead when their schools are not funded well enough for them to be able to then get into those higher education programs. We're not giving them the tools that they need to succeed in any capacity. And all of that needs to change. And it is disgusting to me that it's even a debate of whether or not we need to do these things. And it's not just something everyone has agreed we have to do this because it is the correct thing to do. But I also think that a fundamentally important thing for people, especially people like me, is to also platform the voices of Black people and listen to what they say that they need.
Thank you very much, Ellis. The next question, we are going to do the order of David, then Ellis, then Nikki. It is possible that HR 40 may come up for a vote during your first term in office. Should that occur, how will you vote and why? And before you launch into the answer, in case, and I know that everybody watching knows this, but it bears repeating, HR 40 is to establish a commission to examine the institution of slavery and make recommendations to Congress for reparations. So let's start with you, David.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is something that I would vote yes on 100%. I mean, it's just the commission of kind of like a study session on reparations and what will be kind of the best ways to, repay the people who were, well, not survivors, but relatives and had ancestors in chattel slavery. Obviously, we've seen that reparations have been given to other historical groups in the past, and they've had really positive impacts. I don't know why. I guess people would think that African Americans would be any different. And I also think too that we've got to understand that reparations doesn't always just have to be money. It doesn't have to be checks sent to homes. It can be programs, it can be grants and scholarships, just opportunities that were taken away, and not just taken away socially or any of that kind of stuff. They were taken away by legislative, agendas, right? And so we need to address that. And I think one of the main things is that we talk about how divided we are as a country, how there's race relation problems, there's Democrat Republican problems. Well, I think if you want to start seeing some real healing, we have to go to this point. It may be uncomfortable for some, but we have to start having a real conversation around reparations and how we're going to repay the African American community for the hard work that our ancestors put in and that they were essentially just forgotten about, right? And so, yes, it's a resounding yes that I would vote yes in the support of this. And if I could, I would co-sponsor the bill, right? That's how passionate I am about it. So, wonderful question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer. Ellis, you are second in this question.
It's absolutely, I would vote in support of HR 40. I think it's long overdue. I also think it's the bare minimum at this point is to establish a commission just to research reparations. When realistically, we've done reparations. We know that they work. We know that they're necessary. And we know that even with, any kind of reparations that end up happening, we can never repay the debt that we owe to the people who were brought here against their will to build this country for us. America would not exist the way that it exists today if it were not for the suffering of so many people. And we can never repay that debt. We can never repay that. But the bare minimum is to do something to make it more comfortable for them to exist. So absolutely, I would vote in support of that. I would then vote in support of any further legislation that provides for giving reparations to people, whether that be seizing land and giving them land, whether that be sending them a check directly to their home. Absolutely, we owe everything to the people that we subjugated when this country was founded.
Thank you very much, Ellis. Nikki, I'll have you answer this question as well.
Thank you. Slavery is a stain on our country that we can never blot out. But I do not believe that HR 40 is the correct approach. I believe the better approach is to focus our efforts on creating job opportunities, making healthcare more affordable and accessible, access to affordable housing, providing workforce training and educational opportunities so that all communities have the opportunity to get ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikki. This next question comes to us from friends at Immigration Project. The order will be Ellis, then Nikki, then David. Let's start with you, Ellis. What do you know about the immigrant populations in the new District 13, and how do you plan to represent them?
Well, over 5% of the residents of Illinois 13 were born in another country. And I think that our community is made infinitely better by the inclusion of people of different cultures, of different backgrounds. And we should obviously be helping those people in any way that they possibly need. Our system is cruel and unbelievably callous to immigrants. And as I stated previously, I don't think that they should be treated any differently from anyone else, except for the fact that they have been marginalized by the system that we currently exist in. So whilst I believe that immigrants are just people who moved from one location to another location, our system has not treated them that way. And in order for there to be equality or equity, that has to change. The systems have to change. And we need to be supporting those people in our communities. Absolutely. With no questions.
Thank you so much, Ellis. Nikki, you are second in this round.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. First, let me say we are all immigrants. Let me just make sure. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say, I don't know if you heard me, but I believe that we are all immigrants. The United States can directly connect innovation and immigration. When over half of the Fortune 500 companies today were founded by immigrants or families of immigrants, we can make that linkage. And we need, again, comprehensive immigration reform in this country. I'm running to represent every neighborhood, every corner of the 13th district. I am listening and meeting with voters throughout the district. And so we need to be investing and helping to ensure opportunity is the necessities we all need in our lives, which are good paying jobs, access to healthcare, educational opportunities to better ourselves. We need access to affordable childcare. That's what's going to help people get back to work. These are the types of opportunities that we need to be investing in and what I'll be working on if I'm elected to Congress.
Thank you very much, Nikki. David, last but not least.
Yeah, so I think the growing immigrant population here is exciting, right? I think it shows that this is an amazing place. This is somewhere that people want to live, they want to work, and they want to raise their family. It's such a good thing. And I think as the next congressman here, what I would really do is just to make sure that we welcome them with open arms, that we, make them knowledgeable of the resources that we have available. One of our congressman's main jobs is that kind of constituency service, right? And making sure that the people of your district kind of know what's going on, what's available to them and how your office can help. And so really making sure that we reach out and establish relationships with, key stakeholders and each of the, small groups of people that come over. That's going to be really important because I want them to feel as a part of this community as I do, right? I want them to feel like this is their home the same way that I do. And so, really making sure that we open our arms to them, welcome them, invite them out, do events where they get to meet more people from different areas of this town and of this district, right? And so those are the things that I think anyone running for Congress should be excited about, that kind of person to person, making people feel good, helping them out. That's what I want to do. And like it's an exciting thing to be in a place where people want to move and come to. And so I'm excited to represent the district and welcome everybody with open arms.
Thank you very much, David. Our ninth question involves climate change and environmental justice. It comes from community members. Communities in the 13th district are vulnerable to climate change, with some more vulnerable than others. Some communities depend on fossil fuel industries more than others. They've been left behind in previous national economic transitions. What will you do to ensure that vulnerable communities are protected during the transition to clean energy? The order for this question, Nikki will kick us off, then David, then Ellis. Go ahead, Nikki.
Great, thank you so much. So every family wants clean air and wants clean water for their children, and it should not be about where you live. Before joining the Biden administration, I worked with the labor movement to build a coalition and a strategy to transition Illinois to a clean energy economy, and while also ensuring that we are not leaving working people behind and the communities behind in that transition. Our coalition advocated and successfully fought to keep our full nuclear fleet in Illinois open, both because of its importance to transitioning Illinois to a clean energy economy, but also because of the job and economic impact to the communities. It's important that we prioritize communities that have been most impacted by the climate crisis. And as the renewable industry grows, we should ensure that those communities most impacted are prioritized for investment and local job opportunities. Further, I would also point out that there are key investments the President Biden also had in his bipartisan infrastructure bill to support the clean energy economy and its transition and address climate change. In Congress, I will fight to make sure all communities benefit from that investment. I also believe we can be supporting at its core both working people, support vulnerable and underserved communities impacted, and address the climate crisis that we face today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. David, environmental question for you.
Yeah, so I think the first thing, the simplest thing, right? We need people to acknowledge that climate change is real and it has major impacts on what's going on right now. And, you know, we have to work together to get these things done. I think for me, when I look at, like I said, politics is local, I look at the work that like Representative Ammons and Senator Bennett did, just like to make sure that our Muhammad Aquifer was protected, right? That's the kind of work that we need legislators to go out and do. Make sure that you protect your community, you protect their resources, and that you protect, you know, the people who live there, because we know that things like water insecurity are some of the most, you know, crippling things that a community can go through. And so my goal would just be to ensure that as we go forward, that we have solutions that work to keep our community and our planet protected. And I think one of the things too is that people have to remember that there is a really good economic future in climate change jobs. And I think we have a real opportunity there to provide, you know, meaningful employment where we can get rid of these, you know, so many low wage jobs and stagnant wage jobs and transition people to this kind of clean energy economy, because there's going to be so many jobs and they're going to pay well. And we need to get people acclimated and trained and ready for these kind of jobs. And so I think that as we're, you know, talking to, let's be honest, Republican colleagues in Congress and things, I think that's a point that you're going to have to make, because we need to have climate change happen now, and we need to work aggressively to make it happen, or it will be, you know, a point of no return for our country and our world.
Thank you very much, David. Ellis, you have 2 minutes to answer the environmental question.
So first and foremost, I think the big thing is that we have to do something about climate change, no matter what. Yes, we need to be concerned about these vulnerable communities, but if we don't do anything about climate change, we're all going to die. And that includes the people in vulnerable communities, probably more so than anyone else. So first and foremost, we have to do something about climate change. It is a current issue. It is not something that we can concern ourselves with in 10 or 15 years. Our planet is dying, and we have to do something, or we are all lost. But, and to assuage those fears, I think one of the really important things is to invest in those communities and give them the means to make their communities more green. I think we ensure, I know one of the big priorities with passing legislation regarding legalizing cannabis was to make sure that we invest and give the opportunities first and foremost to communities who were most heavily impacted by those things in the first place. So I think the important thing is to make sure that the people who are in the communities that could be negatively impacted by the loss of the fossil fuel industry, make sure that those communities are being invested in and being given the opportunities to have the means of production to produce that energy for their communities, but also to gain the wealth that comes along with putting these things in place. You know, to not only give the land to people, but say, we will pay to put the windmills on this land, and you will make the money from the windmills that we put on this land. And another thing that I think is fundamentally important is to give Indigenous people a seat at the table when it comes to these conversations. They were taking care of this land before we were ever here, and they did a much better job than we are.
Thank you so much, Ellis. This next final question comes from our friends at Bend the Arc. And we wouldn't be here tonight without Bend the Arc, of course, Jewish Action CU. And when I ask these next two sentences, I absolutely realize that this issue is not easily answered in 2 minutes, and that it takes a whole community. So to me, this is the hardest one to do in 2 minutes, but in the order of David, then Ellis, and then Nikki, I know that you're going to get it done. How do you propose to reduce gun violence, and what makes you think your proposal will work? Let's start with you, David.
Yeah, so I think the first thing we have to do is to acknowledge that this big increase that we've seen in gun violence is mostly driven by, the kind of human trauma that people have been going through with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's really exacerbated things. I think a way to kind of put that into perspective is that if you look at the amount of victims we had from gun violence was 10,000, and it went to 15,000 over a 7-year period, right? And then it went from 15,000 to 20,000 from 2020 to 2021. So we know that there's a correlation there. But I think when you talk about our approach to fix gun violence, it has to be a holistic approach. It won't be, one thing here or one thing there. It's going to have to be, an overarching kind of thing that kind of blankets a community, and everyone has to be invested. And I think we have to look to places that have had success. Now, for me, I look at St. Louis, right? It's the neighbor to our district right across the East St. Louis Bridge over there. And Mayor Tashara Jones there has done a lot of really, really incredible work. You look across the country, gun violence numbers are skyrocketing. And if you look in St. Louis, they're down 25%, right? And that's due to, programs like the Cure Violence programs that really puts an emphasis on, kind of involving more of a social services component where you have people who are in the community, who know the community, who are, they have more of a community engager role where they see stuff going on and they stop problems before they happen. We need to have innovative solutions like that. She's partnered with programs like Every Town, and she's gotten grants and funding and had in just amazing professionals. And I also think that she's brought hope to her city. She provides a lot of hope because she's from these areas that are impacted by this violence. She goes to bed at night and she hears the gunshots as the mayor. And so she's invested in fixing it. And I'm going to be invested in making sure that we get our gun violence problem here under control. And as your next congressman, it'll be one of the top priorities I have on my legislative agenda.
Thank you very much. I know I put a lot of pressure on the question before you answered it, but I appreciate that. Ellis, you are up next.
So I think it's complicated when you're talking about the question of gun violence, because what do you mean when you say gun violence? Do you mean mass shooters, domestic terrorists? Do you mean police gun violence? Or do you just mean gun violence writ large? Because I think when it comes to mass shooters, I think cracking down on white supremacist hate groups will basically solve that problem. The vast, vast majority of mass shootings and domestic terrorism in this country comes from right-wing white supremacist hate groups. I think police violence, again, cracking down on white supremacist hate groups is going to fix a lot of that. But when you're talking about gun violence writ large, what we really need to address is less the guns and more the poverty that causes people to turn to crime. I think when we are talking about gun control in order to curb the gun violence that's happening in cities, we are addressing the symptoms and not the disease. The disease is poverty. Poverty is rampant in this country, and it's only getting worse. The divide between the top 1% and the rest of us is growing wider with every year. And I think until we start addressing the terrible, terrible poverty in some of our cities and across the entire country, we are not going to see gun violence get better, no matter what kind of gun control legislation we put in place. So I think that addressing that problem and genuinely trying to fix the circumstances of the individual people who are suffering, we will see gun violence starting to decrease. So I think the question itself is a little bit flawed in that way. I think we need to be talking about how to fix the disease, not the symptoms.
Okay, thank you, Ellis. All right, Nikki, you have 2 minutes to solve gun violence in the country. Thank you. And last but not least, thank you, Nikki.
Okay, thank you so much. It is a very important and complicated question. I'd like to actually start out by saying I applaud the city of Champaign for how they are prioritizing their ARPA or American Rescue Plan dollars to invest in their local gun violence prevention program. We need to stop the proliferation of illegal guns on our streets, and we need to finally pass common sense gun safety measures like universal background checks, red flag laws, congressional action to ban the sale of bump stocks, and federal legislation to crack down on ghost guns. But we also need to get to the root issues in our communities that go beyond the weapon, which is poverty. I agree. We need to create opportunity again. We need to create good paying jobs and pathways for workforce development so that individuals are trained for the jobs of the future. We need to invest in public transportation to make sure those individuals can get to work or school. We need to invest in street interruption programs and community policing. This is not one simple answer. And that's why it does take more than 2.5 minutes to address, to really fix this gun violence epidemic. It must be a holistic approach, in my opinion, in order to make meaningful progress. And it's something that I would be committed to partnering with local governments to address when I'm elected to Congress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikki. We did not get to cover abortion tonight, and we didn't cover healthcare, and we had questions about higher education, but we have committed to 1 hour and 15 minutes tonight. And if anybody listening or watching has questions for our candidates, we encourage you to reach out to their campaign via email, via social media. We've taken some of the questions in the Q&A, but there are many questions that we want to know as constituents. I want to thank our panel for participating in this congressional candidate forum. If anyone wants to get involved with any of the candidates, please do reach out to Ellis and David and Nikki. They're looking for people out there to help. Phone banking, lit dropping, anything that we want to do to keep, we have the chance to have the 13th congressional district get in the hands of a Democrat. If you think about that, it's going to take all of us to get this done. I do also want to thank our host, Ben the Ark, Jewish Action CU, our co-hosts, Indivisible, Illinois, and the Ubuntu Project, Champaign-Urbana. We also wouldn't have been able to do it without our friends, immigration and environmental allies. So a huge thank you to everyone that managed to make everything happen tonight. Jen Roth for keeping us running. Thank you so much for all of the behind the scenes technical. And I know that I'm not supposed to declare anyone a winner, but Diane Orr, of course, the winner of everything that she touches. So thank you for everything you did tonight. But Ellis Taylor, David Palmer, Nikki Budzinski, whoever wins this primary, we will all get behind you. You're all excellent candidates. Thank you all for being here this evening.